Hello, I'm John McBride. Thank you for joining me to talk about Japanese gardens. One of the great pleasures of visiting Japan is to see one of its famous gardens, perhaps the 10th century Heian Period Byodo-in, representing the paradise of the Amidha Buddha, or one of the public space gardens of Tokyo, which were once strolling gardens of Feudal Lords from the 17th and 18th centuries. One shouldn't miss one of the famous kare-san-sui, or dry landscape gardens. They consist of raked gravel and stone, such as Ryoan-ji Temple's rock garden in Kyoto. Nor, for that matter, a quiet, inviting tea ceremony garden in Kyoto. Or just be delighted by the small courtyard garden at a restaurant or your Japanese inn. We gaze at the garden, acknowledging its beauty, but also realizing that it is more than a quaint arrangement of stones and shrubbery. Intuitively, we think we should be understanding more. This talk will hopefully assist you in gaining a deeper appreciation of the history of Japanese gardens. Japanese gardens are a distillation of many generations. Let's look back over the centuries to appreciate this history. We will finish by looking to the future and the work of Japan's greatest modern landscape architect, Shigemori Mirei. My recommended references are the go-to textbook on Japanese garden design by Mark Peter Keene. Mark's book is available on Kindle. Mark is an American landscape architect and author. He lived in Kyoto for 20 years before returning to Ithaca, New York. He recently moved his home and studio back to Kyoto and recently completed the design of a peaceful contemporary temple garden at Honenin in Kyoto. The garden is called Empty River and is open to the public on 2 days a year. The other recommended reference is the Sakuteki. The Sakuteki is the first treatise on Japanese gardening, written in the 11th century by Tachibana no Toshitsuna, who lived 1028 to 1094. He was the son of Fujiwara Yoshimichi, who built the Byodo-in we just saw. The Sakuteki begins, Ishi o taten koto, first choose your stone. Mark Keene provided interpretation. He understands the art of setting stones is equivalent to the act of garden making itself. The act of standing a stone upright was so spiritually and aesthetically powerful, it was central to the process of garden making. The Sakuteki linked meaning and form. First, by considering gardens as conglomerates or vignettes of the natural world. The Sakuteki used nature as a model, but not to be copied. Knowledge of nature was to be applied with fusei, or taste. Second, through use of Chinese geomancy, the idea that the garden affected the well-being of the entire household. Third, by using the garden to represent Buddhist deities. In the case of the Byodo-in in Kyoto, the garden was an attempt to create the Western paradise of Amidha Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light. And fourth, by explaining taboos. For example, the best ponds are shallow. When a pond is deep, fish become too big and big fish cause problems for people. So the advice was practical as well. Gardening as a fully developed art form was introduced from China and Korea in the 6th or 7th century CE. Gardening was strongly influenced by the philosophy of Taoism. Taoist legends spoke of 5 mountainous islands inhabited by 8 immortals who lived in perfect harmony with nature. Each immortal flew from his mountain home on the back of a crane. The islands themselves were located on the back of an enormous sea turtle. In Japan, the 5 islands became one, Mount Horai. Replicas of this legendary mountain, the symbol of a perfect world, are a common feature of Japanese gardens, as are rocks representing turtles and cranes. Japanese gardens are classified into 2 groups. Those meant to be experienced by entering and walking in them, and the 4 examples are Pure Land, Jodo Gardens, Palace Gardens, Feudal Lord, Warrior Strolling Gardens, and Tea Ceremony Gardens. And the second type are visual gardens, meant to be experienced mainly with the eyes and the mind. You do not enter them, but enjoy them from the balcony or important room. Gardens designed for contemplation and meditation include Zen and kare-san-sui dry landscape gardens, and interior courtyard gardens. Today we will examine all these types of gardens using a time frame of 1200 years of Japanese history. We first look at the earliest style of garden, a Type 1 garden meant to be entered and walked through, the Pure Land Jodo Garden. Pure Land Jodo Gardens were introduced by followers of the immensely popular Amidha Buddha sect during the Nara period, 8th century CE. The gardens emulate Amidha Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light, sitting on a platform or island contemplating in the middle of a lotus pond. Practical implementation is a Buddhist hall on an island called the Nakajima, the middle island, where the island is connected to the shore by an arch-shaped bridge. You can see on the right there. This is the treasured Amidha Buddha statue inside the Byodo-in hall on the Nakajima, or middle island. Amida is surrounded by celestial angels on the walls and sits on a high lotus plant. Our second Type 1 garden, meant to be entered and walked through, are palace or shinden gardens. These appear in the Heian period, in the 9th to the 12th century CE. The rise of the Fujiwara family of regents and their influence over the imperial family, known as the Fujiwara Regency, was the main feature of the entire Heian period. Early Heian coincided with the cultural pinnacle that is the Tang dynasty of China, 618 to 907 CE. The Fujiwara's main palace in Kyoto was the Higashi-sanjo Palace. In Shinden-zukuri architecture, literally the sleeping hall architecture, the entire layout of the pavilions was designed so they looked out over the garden. The compression of gardens in the urban frames of the Shinden influenced the development of the Japanese garden. The Heian palaces were made of untreated wood. Slim verandas surrounded the buildings and were used to view the gardens. The palace sat sympathetically in the garden. Geomancy, which originated in Han China in the 3rd century CE, was also utilized. We might refer to geomancy as feng shui today, a complex group of interrelated concepts that were used to place or arrange buildings and gardens auspiciously. In Heian period gardens, Chinese concepts of harmonizing opposing forces of yin and yang by balancing voids and fluids, which are both yin, with masses and solids, both yang, was applied. The water and small foreground plantings are the soft yin, and rocks and tall background plantings of large trees are the hard yang. Geomancy was used most carefully in the construction of the imperial palace and gardens in Kyoto. The large Shinden Hall faces south. The emperor always faces south, towards the sun. South of the Shinden is an area called the Nante, or Southern Court, covered with brilliant white sand representing spiritual cleanliness. It was also used for kickball, archery and cockfights, so it had a practical purpose, and so plantings were limited to the edges. 2 trees were planted in the southern court. To the west, a tachibana, or citrus, an evergreen representing the eternal aspects of life, and to the east, a cherry tree, a deciduous tree representing the evanescent aspects of life. Again, yang and yin balanced in the garden. A major Fujiwara court aesthetic principle was elegance and refined taste. The court would conduct poetry meetings in the gardens. Buddhism taught them the ideas of impermanence and transience. The first of 3 laws of Buddhism, all realms of being are transient, was reflected in their gardens and poetry. The poems often linked impermanence to the garden. For example, Murasaki Shikibu, the author of The Tale of Genji, wrote, "This world of ours, why should we lament it? Let us view it as we do the cherries that blossom on the hills." Temples of the Heian period incorporated Buddhist symbols, including maps of the Buddhist cosmos in their garden layouts. Mandala were referred to in order to map out the temple gardens. These mandala are an expression of the relationships between the plethora of Buddhas and the physical world. The diamond realm mandala on the right represents the clarity of Buddhist consciousness, and the womb realm mandala on the left represents the physical world in which we live and in which the Buddhas lived. When these 2 mandala are brought together, it gives efficacy to the worship undertaken at the temple and might even represent enlightenment. The layout of the main temple of Kyoto, Ryoan-ji Temple, or the East Temple, built in the 9th century, is based on these mandala. The garden layout is original to the Heian period and is one of the few that has survived until today. The first of our Type 2 gardens, gardens designed to look out upon and not enter, are Zen gardens. The Zen gardens were introduced during the Kamakura period, 1192 to 1333 CE. The Kamakura period saw warriors wrest control of the government from the aristocracy and move the centre of government to a military base in the austere town of Kamakura, about 1 hour south of today's Tokyo. The period saw the development of a new physical setting as gardens began to be built within the comparatively narrow confines of warrior residences and urban Zen temples. Gardens became more masculine with an aesthetic of frugality. The warrior class had a predisposition for things that displayed simple strength. Zen Buddhism was developed by an Indian sage, Bodhidharma. He took his teachings to China in the early 6th century CE. He focused on the practice of meditation as the vehicle to enlightenment. Japan accepted many refugee Zen priests from China in the 13th century as the Sung dynasty collapsed and Zen priests fled to Japan. In Japan, two Zen schools developed around two great teachers, Eisai, with the Rinzai sect, whose Eisai spoke of sudden enlightenment, and Dogen, whose sect was Soto, who believed in gradual enlightenment. Zen strongly influenced Japanese garden design. The Zen gardens developed in Japan were an attempt to see beyond the superficial aspects of the world in order to perceive a greater truth that lies hidden within. This is clear in the sparse design of gardens found in medieval Zen temples. These Zen gardens, their aspects can be summarized as suggestion, irregularity, simplicity, and perishability. Ryoan-ji Temple, or the famous rock garden in Kyoto, was probably the first of these contemplation gardens. It dates to 1499. The garden is a tool to aid meditation. In practice, they are seldom used for meditation. Rather, their maintenance is an important daily ritual. Cleanliness is basic to Zen life. The process of enlightenment is as important as enlightenment itself, being fully alive at each moment. And it's the Zen monks who use the garden to assist with their feeling alive in each moment. We see a strong influence from southern Sung dynasty, 1127 to 1215 CE. Sung predated Muromachi by 200 years. Muromachi was 1333 to 1568 CE. Nevertheless, Sung inkwash paintings were the primary models for the painters and gardeners of medieval Japan. These paintings you see here stand in the rooms overlooking Ryoan-ji's rock garden. And the garden is an attempt to create a three-dimensional framed work of art based on these two-dimensional paintings, which express the vastness of the universe and perhaps with these small rivers with craft on them and highways and tiny human beings within that universe, the tiny role that humans play. A rather small garden could be found to be limitless. This is finding the vast in the small. The Ryoan-ji garden is framed by this patinaed oil mud wall. The oil mixed with the mud soaks out to create the patina of the frame. The use of this wall frame controls how the garden will be viewed. It enables the garden to be viewed as an independent work of art. Another important kare-san-sui, or dry landscape garden, in Kyoto can be found at the Daisein sub-temple of Daitokuji Temple. Established in 1509, the main entrance hall, or genkan, is thought to be the first example of a genkan in Japan, and for this reason is a national treasure. The main hall itself, around which the dry landscape garden is designed, is also a national treasure. The garden traces a story mirroring life, starting at Mount Horai, from which life springs forward and cascades down a three-tiered waterfall. Towards the base of the waterfall, choices can start to be made in life, perhaps a choice to flow to the river section or the quiet middle sea section. This is the river section. It has many obstacles reflecting challenges thrown up in life, again, very much depending on the choices we take in life. The most important stone in the garden is this beautiful treasure boat stone, and the small stone at its base to the left there is in fact the turtle stone. These are the two most important stones in the garden. But perhaps we chose a different path in life and have ended up in the middle sea, a calmer choice with fewer obstacles, but who knows, perhaps fewer rewards. The camellia planting represents dim and distant mountains. No matter which path we choose towards the end of life, we all end up hopefully in a calmer place with these two mounds representing purification, offset to one side of the garden. Again, there is no symmetry in a Zen garden. And a sal tree in the far corner. Sal is the type of tree under which Buddha died in India. The next type of garden developed during the Muromachi period are tea ceremony gardens. They are type 1 gardens meant to be enjoyed by entering and communing with them. The guiding aesthetics born in austere Kamakura came to fruition amidst Kyoto's economic vitality of the Muromachi period in the 14th and 15th centuries CE. The Muromachi period saw great extremes, juxtaposing massive social instability against economic growth and artistic activity, mainly driven by the merchant class of Kyoto. However, in the middle period of the Muromachi period, a civil war broke out, and this began the Warring States period, which would last another century. Gardens became more protective and escapist, such as the important Silver Pavilion, the retirement pavilion of the 8th Muromachi shogun, Yoshimasa. Despite, or precisely because the country was destroying itself, Japan experienced a renaissance, mainly led by this great shogun who was a great patron of the arts, not necessarily a great warrior leader, not a great administrator. But we have him to thank for an outpouring of culture such as tea ceremony, Noh theatre, and linked verse poetry. We see the first 4.5 mat tea ceremony room built here at the Silver Pavilion. You can purchase an extra ticket with timed entry to visit this room. It was during Sen no Rikyu's time that the mood of the tea gatherings shifted from one of excess and display of wealth to that of reserve and humility. Sen no Rikyu developed the tea garden to complement these changing priorities. Natural but well-chosen materials enhanced the relationship between architecture and the garden. The garden acted as an interface between architecture and the natural world. Rikyu developed the ceremony that we know today as wabi-cha. In wabi-cha tea ceremony, we find beauty in the simplicity of common materials when used in a refined way. Wabi is an aesthetic that appreciates good, honest materials which acquire a warm aura or patina with age if well cared for. The aesthetic suggests the positive values of simplicity and its attendant aspects of tranquility, frugality, and elegant rusticity. It is perfectly expressed in the tea bowls of Rikyu's choice from the Raku kiln in Kyoto. These bowls are simple, unpretentious, they're imperfect and irregular, austere and stark. This is Raku Chojiro, the first generation of the Raku family's magnificent omokage tea bowl. In the tea ceremony garden, value accrues from both use and concealment. The logic of both tea ceremony and Zen gardens is to make extensive use of all sorts of barriers, stone and mud walls, bamboo gates and partitions, sliding paper screens called shoji, and often a simple small stone with a black rope tied around it. This is called a sekimori ishi. These sekimori ishi recall the sacred place behind a shimenawa rope in a Shinto shrine. This is the tea garden in one of the sub-temples of Daitokuji Temple in Kyoto, the Kyoto-in. This is the semi-public approach to the tea rooms. An internal private roji. Roji were designed by Sen no Rikyu. It's a term he coined. It means the dewy path, and the dewy path leads the guest to the private tea rooms. The stepping stones are perfectly spaced but difficult to walk on. They require all of one's concentration, and one looks down carefully and constantly, but occasionally there is a flat stone where you can rest and look up at the garden and enjoy a different view at each moment of pause and commune with the garden. The choice of weathered stone lanterns adds atmosphere. In fact, one finds many reused or old or discarded objects in the garden. This is known as mitate mono. Examples include old tiles, which provide drainage at the base of the simple roof lines of tea ceremony houses, which are often free of guttering. An old foundation stone might provide for an ablution basin. This is in the gardens of Kyoto-in. And discarded millstone. These are very popular in Japanese gardens. They provide a flat surface at which to pause one's walk through the garden, but they're very beautiful objects. Eventually, the tea rooms are revealed. The head house of tea ceremony is known as the Omote Senkei. Other schools include Ura Senkei and Mushakoji Senkei. But this is the family in its 15th generation, which has descended directly from Sen no Rikyu. And for over 400 years they have lived here in central Kyoto. This is the main gate to their main tea rooms. The tea room complex is called Fushingan, named after the main tea room, Fushingan, in this extraordinary complex of tea rooms. The name Fushingan comes from the Zen saying, Fushin hana hiraku konnichi no haru, which means, mysteriously the flowers open, spring from today. So Fushin means mysterious, and refers to the spirit that is moved by the greatness of nature, which is perhaps beyond the human intellect in its mystery. Guests enter the inner sanctum at Fushingan through the middle gate and are guided along the way by the Sekimori Ishi, which act as guideposts and stop signs. The guests use the tsukubai ablution bowl to cleanse their hands and mouth before waiting for a while in the arbor, communing with nature, and then the host will come out and silently invite the guests into the tea room. And this is the entrance to the Fushingan. Guests enter through this tiny doorway, the plain wooden doorway you can see there, under which everyone bows low to the same level, which means everyone is equal in the tea room. And this is the interior of Fushingan. Every beam and column uses a different timber, an expression of the variety and interest of nature. The walls are made from mud and patina, much like the oil walls of Ryoan-ji. Of course, there's no oil in these walls. And we paste washi paper at the bottom there to protect people's kimono, but they patina beautifully. The second type of type 2 gardens, those to be viewed from outside, are courtyard gardens. You are likely to experience one of these gardens in a Kyoto restaurant or townhouse. These structures have short frontages. They were taxed on their frontages, but they're very deep, and so the courtyard gardens are delightful spaces which act to give life and breath to these buildings. But you don't see the gardens unless you're inside the building. These machiya, or townhouses of Kyoto, were called beds of eels. They were long and narrow. Japanese have traditionally believed that the home should be part of the natural surroundings, that a home which does not blend into the environment is not a true dwelling. The indoor courtyard garden is thus more than a mere patio and garden. In the limited living space of city homes, the indoor garden provides the only contact and communion with nature. In a small space where the size and number of trees is limited, one discovers a miniature expression of nature. The courtyard gardens often separate the main living areas and as you see, shop space from storehouses at the back of the home. A well in the garden can help with firefighting, and precious objects can be placed in paulownia wood boxes and even thrown down the well to be recovered after a fire. Even works on paper. The paulownia expands instantly and keeps the objects inside watertight. This is the courtyard garden of the Buddhist vegetarian restaurant Ikkyu, which is in, this one is just outside Daitokuji Temple in Kyoto. The final garden of type 1, gardens to be entered, are the Edo period daimyo or feudal lord strolling gardens. Now, these gardens were developed in the Muromachi period, and the Temple of the Golden Pavilion from 1397, built by Yoshimitsu, the third Muromachi shogun, the grandfather of the 8th shogun Yoshimasa, who built the Silver Pavilion. This Silver Pavilion, which was built in 1482 by the 8th Muromachi shogun, are excellent examples of strolling gardens, and the Edo period gardens are based somewhat on these gardens. Visitors to the Temple of the Silver Pavilion, Kyoto, are first struck by this impressive main approach. A bamboo fence you can just see, known as Ginkakuji Gaki, might not even be noticed by the visitor, overwhelmed by this immense verdant hedge consisting of many types of plants, including camellia, clipped into this uniform wall. The approach is 50 meters long and sweeps the mind clear of frivolous concerns. In landscaping his villa, Yoshimasa took inspiration from the garden designed by very famous Musou Soseki at Saihoji Temple, the moss garden temple in Kyoto. It's an excellent early example of a pond garden for strolling, which is called Kai en Shiki Chisen Teien. The pond is on the other side of this mountain crest, which is called Tsukimachi-yama, which means mountain awaiting the moon. This incredibly contemporary design, it was thought that it's likely created from a pile of sand from the Shirakawa River, which was dumped here awaiting use by the gardeners in the main garden, but they thought this looks wonderful, we'll leave it as is. And this is the pond behind that garden. It's called the Kinkyochi, or Brocade Mirror Pond. The pond sits in the center of the garden and features 7 stone bridges and 4 floating stones. And these stones were brought from all over Japan, so it's necessary to ask, the meaning of the stones. The Silver Pavilion of Ginkakuji is actually this sedate 2-story kannon hall. It was never covered in silver leaf. It is a national treasure. It stands on the far side of the pond, and from the other side, on the far side of the raised sand garden dominating the central court. Yoshimasa practiced Zen and was devoted to Pure Land teachings. He named the meditation space on the ground floor Shinkuden, Hall of the Emptied Mind. And the upper story he named Cho Onkaku, or Sound of Waves Pavilion. And the second floor contains a gilt image of Kannon, the goddess of mercy. But let's look at the Edo period, known for its feudal lord strolling gardens. And the wonderful thing is that many fine examples have survived. These gardens were not hidden away on country estates, such as in England. The aristocracy in London wanted to get away from the stench of London. But in Japan, they were visible to the public and were in town and were a way for feudal lords to show off their status. And on occasion, they were opened to commoners to come and enjoy the gardens. This excellent example is the Ritsurin Gardens, the chestnut forest gardens in Takamatsu, Shikoku. But Japan considers its three most famous strolling gardens to be Kenroku-en in Kanazawa. It's said you should see this garden in the winter when the pine trees have these yukizuri, or very sculptural devices which suspend each and every branch of the ancient pine trees to protect the branches from breaking under the weight of snow. The branches probably wouldn't break, but for the winter months, the yukizuri provide this wonderful sculptural aspect to the garden. Second is Koraku-en in Okayama on the inland sea of Japan. It's a very masculine, samurai-like garden. You can see Okayama Castle, which actually sits outside of the strolling garden. But the garden is known for its very masculine cycads. You might call them sago palms, ancient plants. They're very expensive to transplant here from tropical areas. And so they were representative of masculinity and power and prestige. And third is the Kairaku-en in Mito, which is north of Tokyo, famous for its white and pink plum blossoms. So it's to be enjoyed in late January, early February. The son of Tokugawa Nariaki, who Nariaki built this garden, would become Japan's last shogun in the Edo period. His name was Yoshinobu, and he resigned power in favor of the emperor. In Tokyo, Shinjuku Gyoen is a wonderful visit during the Edo period, 1603 to 1868 CE. We saw an institutionalization of the daimyo, or feudal lord system, by which Edo controlled the provinces. Feudal lords were required to travel to Edo on alternate years, and they maintained 3 residences in Edo. An office near the castle, a magnificent residence near the castle, and then in the outer areas of Edo, these garden estates, which were a place to fall back in emergency in case of fire. They had warehouses full of food, emergency stocks, and you could entertain in them and display your power. Shinjuku Gyoen was the garden estate of the Naito family, feudal lords of what is now the city of Ina in Nagano Prefecture, which is in central Honshu. Another fine daimyo or feudal lord strolling garden is Rikugien. I like this garden because my university was next door, and I lived next door for 5 years or so. Rikugien was founded in 1702 by Yanagisawa Yoshiyasu, lord of the Kawagoe clan, which is in Saitama, very close to today's Tokyo. He was an official serving the 5th shogun, Tsunayoshi. More than 7 years were required to transform the flat piece of land. The soil dug out for the lake was used to create hills from which it was possible to view Mount Fuji and Mount Tsukuba, the two very important reference mountains in Feng Shui terms for the building of Edo itself. But during the Edo period, there was an increased interest in travel, expressed through travel guides and woodblock prints, and of faraway places expressed in famous poetry. And this interest began to influence garden design. Famous scenic places from Japan and China were favorite models. Garden designers collected these images as if they were sculptures to be set out through the garden. One of the distinguishing characteristics of Rikugien is the literary flavor Yoshiyasu added by using 88 scenes made famous by poets. This scene is the Togetsu-kyo Bridge in Kyoto. And this is the actual bridge in Arashiyama, West Kyoto. The garden is particularly well known for its azaleas. There was a great fashion for azaleas in Edo from the late 1600s until the early 1700s, just as Rikugien was being built. It was also the time that preeminent azalea of authority, Ito Ihei, Itoihei, was active in Edo. Ito-san lived in the adjacent Somei district, the center of Edo gardening. And the azaleas we see in the garden are descended directly from the Edo period. Some are hundreds of years old. You'll also see the Somei Yoshino cherry trees, which are wild cherries from Yoshino, south of Nara, which were variegated again by the Somei gardeners, looking for a whiter pink in the cherries. And so they're known as Somei Yoshino cherries. Visiting Rikugien, it's still fascinating to watch the Somei gardeners working in the garden, pruning and caring for the garden. To complete this section, we will look at perhaps the most important aristocratic strolling garden from the Edo period, the Katsura detached imperial villa in Kyoto. As with feudal lord strolling gardens, views are concealed, revealed, and concealed again as one strolls around the garden. The palace itself, the buildings in the garden, are recognized as one of Japan's and perhaps the world's finest architectural achievements. The German architect Bruno Taut claimed this was the most important structure in the world. We conclude with a look at modern and contemporary gardens, and in particular the achievements of the father of modern Japanese landscape architecture, Shigemori Mirei, 1896 to 1975. Shigemori Mirei is Japan's most notable modern Japanese landscape architect. He was also a historian of Japanese gardens. He studied Japanese painting at the Tokyo Fine Arts School, and it was with this painter's eye that he would later craft many of his gardens. The middle part of his life was spent studying and documenting the famous gardens of Japan through the ages. Between 1936 and 1939, he surveyed hundreds of gardens, and this resulted in the 26-volume History of the Japanese Garden, the greatest resource available on Japanese gardens. Unfortunately, it's not available in translation. He realized that the modern gardening tradition lacked innovation, and he didn't find it very interesting. He felt innovation had stopped in the mid-Edo period, the 18th century. Later in life, he set about a contemporary renewal of the older garden type kare-san-sui, the dry landscape garden. With his detailed knowledge of the history of Japanese gardens, he was able to base his work on a long history of Japanese garden art, while insisting that the art form required renewal and continuous development. He blamed the stagnation in Japanese gardens on the mid-Edo period, which saw much nostalgic copying but little innovation. If anything, innovation at this time, mid-Edo, came only in the form of increased quality in the skills of the gardeners, rather than their development of different garden styles. As his commissions to build new gardens flourished, Shigemori continued to use rocks as the central focus of his gardens, but twisted their use. He also used sand, which was traditional, but introduced new colours and new raked patterns, such as these much deeper rakings in his garden. In 1939, he designed Tofuguji. This was a garden around the residence of the priests, and is his first garden, and is really a must visit when you're in Kyoto. This was such an important project to him that he worked for free. It's the epitome of a contemporary Japanese garden. Working for free for the poor temple enabled him to work with freedom, creating a south garden with a 4-stone setting representing the islands of the immortals, and 5 moss-covered mounds representing the 5 Zen sects of Kyoto. The west garden is inspired by rice fields, using simple recycled stone on the curbs. You can see the corners of the rice paddies. To the north is the famed grid of stone plates sitting in the moss. Now, we see this in many contemporary gardens today, but remember, this is the first time this is applied in 1939, which is extraordinary. And the back garden features a constellation from the Milky Way, the Big Dipper, a stone arrangement reusing the old foundation stones of the former toilet building. So Shigemori passed on 12 March 1975. Thank you.